Hello, 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 and welcome to the Brothers of Dynasty live stream. We keep doing this, and people keep watching, at least some people. I'm your host, Josh Christensen. I'm joined, as always, by my brothers, Andrew and Jay. I'm jettisoning a bit tonight because I couldn't think of one, and so I just went right into introducing us. Is that okay with you guys? Is that okay with you? Damn it.
That's great, Josh. Unbelievable. Best open ever.
I'm not fine with it.
To the millions of people listening, I apologize for Josh's shortness on the intro. I know that's your favorite part of the show because then you can sign off after it's over.
Well, yeah, that's great. That's all people listen to. That's fine. If that's all people listen to, as long as you download, I don't care. Just keep it running in the background.
Live stream?
On the podcast app, a reminder, you can also listen to the ears-only edition of the Brothers of Dynasty on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. But since you are listening live, if you're here, remember you can comment in the YouTube feed, and we will answer your questions. We will feature your takes, so get those in there. If you troll us, well, okay, we'll feature that too. We're not
good
picky.
Faith. We'll answer all trolling questions.
Exactly. Doesn't matter how ridiculous, we will answer it. We should get
Mr.
to what
Grapefruit, if you're out there, feel free to.
We feel like talking about defenses right now. So.
That is a very inside joke, Jay. That is from a different show entirely that you host on Going for Two live on Fridays at 8:30.
That's right. You would think people wouldn't troll random YouTube shows on Friday nights, but they do.
It's true. You got a dislike from Mr. Grapefruit. It was terrible.
It's a loyal. He's a loyal listener that we like. We like him.
Anyways,
enjoy him.
Jay, what are you drinking tonight?
Tonight I'm drinking some Castle Island Brewery right here. This beer was not created by Urban Meyer, surprisingly, but it is called Twist and Grind. It is a wet hopped India Pale Ale, and
wet hopped just sounds. Gross.
Yeah, it's just an awful combination there. I shouldn't even. It's just Castle Island. Yeah, it's a good beer though.
Exactly. Right, it's hops and they're wet.
Yeah.
Andrew, what are you drinking tonight?
I've got Little Wolf from Zero Gravity. It's a pale ale, and it is not wet hopped. It's very dry hopped, like bone dry hopped.
Don't repeat that. That's a gross word. That's a gross word to say.
I like it. I'm gonna. Sorry. Well, you'll have to watch the live stream if you're a podcast listener to see what the comment was. That's terrific. I love that. What am I drinking, you ask? Well, I'm drinking another Aperol and gin sour cocktail called a Church for some reason. Don't really know why.
How is it hot?
Oh, it is soaking wet.
The name in the chat's throwing me off because the Robert Freer. That's I think that's our friend Paul Freer.
Is it Paul going by Robert? Okay. It's fucking terrible.
It's Brother Frere, and Frere is French for brother, so it's.
It's Mon Frere.
Yeah.
First name M-O-N, last name Frere.
Now to find out who this Hermano guy is.
I was just gonna go to that tweet. Oh, that's funny. It's a pseudonym. Yep. His nom de plume.
It's a great name.
It's great. It's terrific. Anyways, let's move on to football. So we're going to be reacting to Week 8. Again, this was a kind of a week to forget in football. Pretty rough, pretty sad week overall. Obviously, the big news is the likely season-ending foot injury to Derrick Henry. Just when we were bought in on him being indestructible, he goes and gets structed.
I said it every week. Indestructible. Yeah.
Not great. We're going to get into him more in depth because we're going to do our top 12 Dynasty running back ranks. We thought this was a good week to do that light of the Derrick Henry industry.
Out of my ranking.
Droppable in all formats.
He's a streamer at best going forward. But First, let's go over a few quick storylines from Week 8 before we get to our running back rankings. If you weren't watching the day, you might have missed a few other injuries. Obviously, Derrick Henry consumed a lot of that. James Robinson day-to-day with a foot injury. Sam Darnold left the game with a concussion, was relieved by P.J. Walker. He'll be in the protocol for this week on a nasty hit. He got rocked. That looked bad.
Gone.
Yeah, that was a rough hit.
Yeah.
For sure.
Pretty much, it looked like the Daniel Jones hit from a couple weeks ago. Daniel Jones didn't miss a week, so I don't know what the hell we're doing in concussion protocols, but clearly it's not for the safety of the players. Jameis Winston, this is another sad one, ACL tear. He's done for the season. That's a tough time to get an ACL because this is not too far from when Joe Burrow had his injury last year, and Joe Burrow was good to start the season, but ACLs can be weird. Is Jameis Winston going to be good to go at the beginning of next season? And are the Saints going to have him as their starting quarterback? Could this be an impetus to replace him overall? I don't know if he's necessarily locked in there. So kind of a really tough injury for Jameis Winston, not only for this season, but for his starting career overall. And then we also had, this wasn't an injury, but Calvin Ridley is out indefinitely for personal matters. He stated his mental health as a reason why. And also, I just want to state up top from this, there's a lot of people out there making some pretty stupid takes about Calvin Ridley in terms of like the privilege he has to take this kind of leave and how everybody like how normal working people don't have this privilege. The problem's not Calvin Ridley in that circumstance, just to let you know. Mental health is a very serious thing. We're not talking about like, oh, Derrick Henry's abandoning his team for having a foot injury. Mental health is extremely serious. Same thing with the Simone Biles situation. These people are putting themselves in very dangerous situations, and anxiety and depression and other mental health issues can cause serious fog and serious inability to concentrate. And if you're going over the middle to catch a pass and you are not all there mentally, you could get very seriously injured. So before you make a stupid take about mental health, maybe just think about it a little bit and then don't make that take because you don't know what you're talking about. Just believe people who say they have mental health issues. It's a serious health concern, particularly for people who are putting themselves in real harm's way with 250-pound linebackers coming for them over the middle of the field. So that's what we'll say about that for Calvin Ridley, and just hope that he can get whatever issues he's facing in order and get back to football, which we all know he wants to do and loves to play. And so if he's out for the rest of the season, that's fine. That's all for the injury news, I believe. Jay, Andrew, were there any other injuries or absences that I missed?
Did you mention James Robinson? That's like a day-to-day. He came out of that game.
He did,
he didn't come back. So he got hurt. Hopefully that sounds day-to-day though, so it doesn't sound
bruised
serious.
heel, like a heel contusion.
So he avoided serious injury. When you hear foot, ankle, particularly foot, obviously with the Derrick Henry, and it could be concerning, but his was not serious, luckily, for those who roster James Robinson on their team.
We did have another comment in here just about Ruggs. This is, again, if you haven't heard already, there was a very tragic situation with Henry Ruggs that took place where early Tuesday morning he was involved in a car crash where he is allegedly had signs of intoxication, where unfortunately a woman died in a very tragic situation. We're not going to touch this in fantasy analysis. We're not going to talk about what this means for Henry Ruggs, just like our thoughts and our sympathies go out to the family of the woman that died, and just a really tragic situation overall with Henry Ruggs. Like I said, this was kind of in terms of in and around the NFL, this was a pretty sobering week on a lot of different levels. So a week I'm sure we're all keen to leave behind and move on from. But to transition out of that, I wanted to throw it to you and Jay, you and Andrew. And were there any storylines you wanted to touch on outside of these injuries? Going first to you, Jay. Storylines from week 8 you want to highlight?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones I think was the surprise in New York with Mike White.
Mike
lighting it
White,
up.
the second coming.
Unbelievable.
TB White.
TB White. Just to go with a real weird week in quarterback. I mean, if you just look at the top 12 quarterbacks on the week, you had Mike White, who threw for over 400 yards. You see Jimmy G up there. You see Geno Time popping in at number 7 overall on the week. Also saw Cooper Rush sneak into the top 12. I mean, that's how kind of weird this week was from a fantasy perspective. But Mike White is an interesting case here because he didn't look too bad last week, and then he comes in this week and the Jets upset the Bengals. He throws for, like I said, over 400 yards, multiple passing touchdowns, 3, comes back in the game. They're down 10. I don't.
Yeah.
It was like a different team. They were moving the ball, and it wasn't like he was checked out. He was throwing it downfield. He was getting it to Michael Carter. So I don't know what this means totally in terms of you've got Zach Wilson hurt. For a little while, they signed Joe Flacco, which was interesting. So he's there. I think Mike White has earned starting going forward. So he's an interesting pickup in Superflex leagues, which I'm sure is happening. If he didn't get picked up last week for a start, he's certainly going to get picked up this week because he's an interesting streamer. Obviously, risk there, but I guess I don't know if it's half joking, but it's like, is there a QB controversy there? It wouldn't be unheard of, but you want to laugh it off, but at the same time, weirder things have happened where a guy gets an opportunity and plays well, and then all of a sudden you have to think about things down the line. Certainly one game doesn't solidify any of that, but let's see what Mike White does going forward. And then maybe we're revisiting this a little bit more seriously down the road, or it could be that flash in the pan where we never talk about Mike White again. We'll see.
It's true. I mean, I will wait. If he strings together for in the few weeks that Zach Wilson's going to be out, if Mike White lights it up for 4 straight games, maybe we consider talking about. It's just wild that
something. Zach Wilson didn't do any of that with the same team. Corey Davis didn't even play in this game. It's kind of wild, but
he was all right last week too. So I don't know if you factor that. I mean, he wasn't great, but for fantasy purposes,
but he came in and they didn't really miss. It wasn't like it was oh my god, what although the bar was pretty low, but he raised it this week though, because that was not anything that offense had really done the whole year.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I do want to. I think the Cincinnati Bengals just looked bad and checked out in that game too. So I don't know. Yeah, obviously you want to see it repeated before we get out over our skis with the Mike White.
No, I'm not. This is not actionable information. It's just sort of wow, that came out of nowhere. That's something to monitor after, if it continues to act.
I think the only thing actionable about this is if you are contending and you got a bye week coming up and you want to just try to fill in. You only have
stream
2
Mike
QBs.
White. Yeah.
Stream Mike White. I think he's going to be at least worthwhile as a QB2.
I think if I've owned Zach Wilson, I might pay a little bit of fab, a decent amount, just to kind of hedge that player.
That looming quarterback controversy.
Why? Sometimes you're gonna play that you just don't know what's gonna happen. Again, I know most likely what's gonna happen is that Mike White probably reverts way down to the mean, and eventually we go back to Zach Wilson, and maybe at best it gives Zach Wilson some time to recuperate, get things back in perspective, recuperate and get back out there kind of fresh after the injury, and maybe being able to reassess a lot of the things that maybe didn't go so great.
That's what we're saying.
I mean,
but if not,
here's what the real
guy that there is a bottom chance that maybe he does do a little bit more for you if Zach Wilson isn't ultimately the guy.
Well, I mean, here's actually what I think the real very slim chance best case scenario is for Mike White. He plays well for 3 or 4 games while Zach Wilson's out. And then next year, he ends up on a team that either does not have a quarterback or has an open quarterback competition, and maybe he has a way into like a placeholder job or a
like a Foles path.
Yeah, it's probably more of a Gardner
Yeah.
Minshew path, that type of thing. Heineke.
Heineke, yeah, like say, I mean, like this isn't a strong QB year. There's a lot of QBs that are there's a lot of teams that are going to be QB needy. Maybe he ends up on one of those teams. Maybe he ends up on a team like the Saints, and Jameis Winston isn't ready to come back, or they move on, and the Saints, give some guys a try in training camp, and he wins out. I don't really think you spent the number 2 pick on Zach Wilson. They're not folding for 3 good games of Mike White. Moving on.
But I mostly want that for Jets fans to have to deal with like that situation.
I don't know. I think they love Mike White over there.
You know how quickly Jets fans would buy into Mike
They're
White?
like, just give us any good quarterback. Do you think they care that they spent the top pick on some guy? Top picks fail all the time. They're like if
Mike
he's stringing
White.
together wins.
Mike White is
Who
the second
cares?
coming of Chad Pennington. He's the heir apparent.
The heir apparent to Chad Pennington, the new Sanchez. Let's go on. What's another story? We talked way too much about Mike White. What's another storyline?
I love
Andrew, that you want to highlight?
I don't know. I mean, most stories, as we've talked about, feel like just continuations to stuff we've already talked about, but still feeling a little disenchanted with Mahomes' performance. I think that Kansas City team just feels a little strange and like Travis Kelce not looking like himself out there, really, like had like a weird sort of fumble that I think is just fully uncharacteristic. But yeah, it's just starting to make it seem like even some of the top teams just feel so beatable. And yeah, Mahomes with his second week under 15 fantasy points, like after I'd made a case that, hey, even though, he's looking a little less bulletproof, he's still a guy who has like a floor of getting you 20 points a week, like no matter what. And even that, like it just some weird, it just seems like maybe we're getting to that point where he's going to get over the next plateau. And it's like, everyone has the tape on that team. Like they're one of the top teams. Everyone's watching out for him. And maybe it's kind of catching up to him. He can't make some of like those gutsy moves that he used to. Because there was actually some plays that were called that would have been negative. There was a really bad pick that he threw that evidently maybe he just tried because it was an offsides play. He knew it and kind of made like a tough throw. But I feel like there's holes in the armor that people are exploiting, and I'll be interested to see if he kind of makes that next push to be like, all right, now I need to adapt further. Like I got by.
Yeah. I mean, there was one interception that I audibly laughed at because he just pegged Jerick McKinnon in the face. The ball.
Oh yeah, that one went up in the air.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. But I still think nothing is as funny as Carson Wentz interception there.
Well,
like
he one-upped himself this week. Unbelievable.
Oh my
the
God.
left-handed and that was
to the non-throwing and just whips it forward.
That was unreal.
I have no idea. You have to. That's like this is the whole thing. Carson Wentz. Oh my God. We'll talk. We could do a whole episode on breaking down Carson Wentz. But back to Mahomes for a second. I think it was interesting. I think I was watching. I was watching Dan Orlovsky on NFL Live earlier today, and he was kind of breaking down some tape of just like where the like technique flaws are that weren't a problem for Mahomes before are now coming in. Like the thing about Mahomes is he was always like exciting. He was kind of a gunslinger. He made plays that no one else could make with unreal arm strength. But like, was he the most technically proficient QB? No, that was never his thing. And that's not like a knock against him. There's not everyone's Drew Brees, you know what I mean? Where it's just like the most technically sound things. He makes like great off-platform throws, but like that's creeping into everything he does. And he's just not taking the easy plays. And I guess as my internet blips out here, as I'm going through, I'm going to hold for a second. Jay, Andrew, my internet went down for a second. Am I back live with you?
You are back. You're back.
It was like 3
I am
seconds
back.
you were out.
Anyway, so
everything you said was brilliant. It was just brilliant. I just
That's terrific. Thanks so much, guys. Anyways, but my overall question, I think that I'm trying to get to in a more circuitous way, is how long does this Mahomes trend have to continue for us to flip-flop our rankings a little bit and put Josh Allen as our QB1, who has certainly done nothing to dissuade us from having him up in that top tier? Like, when do we start to consider Patrick Mahomes no longer being our dynasty QB1?
Yeah, it's certainly it's getting to be in range, just because the question marks that hadn't haunted him to this point was consistency. He was the guy that just would never have a bad game, really, overall. And now we've seen a couple weeks in a row where he's kind of had like the worst games of his career, just about. Particularly 2 weeks ago versus the Titans, and he didn't follow it up with a stellar performance at home versus a Giants defense that's exploitable. They're frisky, but come on, overall.
Well, I think they're not. Neither of those are worse defenses, but like they're not great. They're not teams that Mahomes should be falling.
No, and the Titans secondary was pretty terrible on the year up until last week. And all of a sudden they put it together, and they weren't that great. I mean, Michael Pittman scored 2 touchdowns on them this past week, so it's like that. These are defenses he should be scoring points on. He should be getting 25 plus fantasy points, somewhere around there, or at least the only thing that should be holding him back would be if they're rushing too many touchdowns, that type of thing. So it definitely puts him back in the conversation of like, he was always the guy with the safest range of outcomes. That's why I would have him at the top of my board, because I didn't feel like he had the floor that some of the other guys had, Kyler, Josh Allen. It just puts him down where I could see after a few more weeks, if it doesn't quite stabilize, and particularly by the end of the season when we're going to have to really have rankings for next redraft season going forward, I could certainly see myself putting the guys that I like the upside better, which would be the rushing quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Kyler. I could see them for sure jumping Mahomes if I don't have that safety of that floor that I once thought I had.
Yeah, especially if these turnovers are going to become more of
that's what scares
a staple.
Me a bit.
Yeah, not that I expect him to throw, like, he's on pace to throw like 20 plus interceptions this year. I don't think that's going to be a thing, but he was throwing, I think he threw 6 last year. I think he's been really but if he's more in like the double digits, that doesn't mean he can't be an elite option, but it brings him down to earth a little bit, if that's the thing, because it's a drive killer. It's not just
too far.
It's not just the -2. It's the fact that this ends drives, and that takes away more opportunity for potential points. And I think about a guy like, and that doesn't mean he can't be an elite quarterback. I mean, like, Peyton Manning threw a lot of interceptions. Like, that's just a reality. He was always around like 10 to 15 interceptions. And if that's Mahomes, that doesn't mean they can't win with him. But I do think it makes him less of the Superman and that gap between the other quarterbacks than we thought we had with him. Like, we thought he was something completely different, but have we ever seen that actually completely hold out with someone? Like, we had the same conversations about Aaron Rodgers years ago, and Aaron Rodgers sunk back into the pack a little bit. He was always like a top 5, top 8 at worst.
He'd have worse seasons than others, always good.
Yeah, he'd have seasons where he was elite, like your clear cut, but he was always in that top tier, but he wasn't a tier onto his own. And that's what we thought we had with Patrick Mahomes, was a tier onto his own. And I don't know if that's the case anymore right now. And part of me thinks if this continues in the off season, I might be going into next season with Josh Allen as my number 1 in the QB ranks.
Which I think is a good point, and I think we kind of already started getting there too. I think in our previous discussions, it was that tier of 1 at the top of Patrick Mahomes was much closer in striking distance even then. And he was a quarterback that seemed almost flawless. And if we're introducing a few flaws, it's not that he's not a QB1 or even a top 5 quarterback. It's just the tiers have changed, and it's not so crazy to take a Josh Allen or if you like a Dak Prescott or I think I'm more alone on the Dak. I love Dak, but or if you want to go younger with Kyler or even Herbert. Despite Herbert's kind of rough couple weeks here, but it's kind of a learning process too with it. Like, it's It hasn't been in as long as someone like Mahomes. So either way, that's just to say there's arguments for other players in that. Mahomes, I don't think, is the set it and forget it 101 in Superflex that we considered him for the past couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. One quick storyline before we move on to running backs, and this will segue us pretty well into that. Adrian Peterson, at 36 years old, is signed with the Titans. He will be in a committee, I'm sure, with Jeremy McNichols for touches in lieu of the Derrick Henry injury. So worth a pickup in your leagues. Derrick Henry was fairly productive last year in limited stats with the Lions. Peterson. What did I say?
You said
it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
you said
Peterson. I mean Adrian Peterson. Nathan Peterman at running back. Anyways, worth a pickup in your leagues. He's probably going to get some snaps. What percent of fab for AP is a question on there.
All of it, just 100%.
Trade, do the classic trade for more fab and then bet.
Yeah, I always find these.
Which in our one league, fab's all the rage in trades right now. And
yeah, it's true. Shout out to Ben. He's our resident fab expert. Fab correspondent for the Brothers of Dynasty, Ben Pimentel. I don't know if he's watching today. That's always a weird question, I guess, with percent of fab to give. I mean, I guess it depends on the situation you're in. If you really, really need a running back, yeah, go all in for Adrian Peterson. I don't think that's a I don't understand what that means, Dad. This isn't Gary's corner. Get out of here. I'm kidding. Let's move on to our running back rankings. So we'll do these the same as we did our wide receivers rankings last week. And we will start off with
consensus one.
Yeah, consensus number one. I'm going to start alone with this because we were in agreement here with Jonathan Taylor as all of our consensus Dynasty 101. And honestly, it took me longer to get there on Jonathan Taylor than both of you, but I have gotten there, and I'm with you now on the Jonathan Taylor train. He is terrific. He's been wonderful. But Jay, I'll throw it to you first. Why Jonathan Taylor as your number one Dynasty running back?
Well, why not, Josh? Why not? You got to pick someone, right?
Case closed.
Great analysis. Wonderful. No notes.
No notes. Yeah. I mean, what's not to like about Jonathan Taylor in terms of he's got the age, 23. And he's been arguably one of the top couple backs in the league since about the midway point last year. Had maybe a rough game at the start of this year. Weeks 1 and 2 weren't necessarily amazing, but his usage has continued to rise from the beginning of the year this year to the point where now he's starting to dip into that workhorse amount of usage, and he probably could get more. That's the kind of the crazy point. Is he probably could
I still think it's a
carries.
bit low. Yeah,
yeah. Like
I mean, he hasn't had a game over 20 carries yet this year. He's RB 3 in points, and he had several games last year with over 20 carries. So there is definitely room to grow for his.
Yeah, there's room to grow, and he's crushing it from like every other perspective in terms of just yards after contact, yards per carry. I mean, he's lighting it up from all the perspectives. He's had numerous plays this year where he has popped long runs, or even from a screen perspective. He gets involved enough in the pass game too. It's not as if he is a prolific pass catcher like, yes, Joe Mixon. Yes, I love Joe Mixon.
We'll get to Joe Mixon. We're not going to get
you threw me off here. I don't even know what to say. All I can think about is
Jay, just send it right back. Pass on that.
Yeah, I'll pass on that. But we're not comparing Jonathan Taylor to the prolific pass catchers like CMC when he's out there, or Alvin Kamara, or even DeAndre Swift, but he can do it enough there where I think they can involve him. I've seen him, especially the past 2 weeks, if you've been watching, he's out there on third downs too. They're not pulling him immediately on third downs. He's getting enough play there where, once again, his snap share can stay high. I hope the usage can get above 20 carries, but man, watch him play too. One of my favorite runners, his jump cut, like just how quick for a guy that his good size, and then when he gets straight and in the open field, the guy's a freight train in terms
His
of
burst.
a fast
Like when he
Yeah, that's the thing I was just gonna
guy
say.
who just is
The
going to be
burst.
hard to that burst once he gets going, like forget about it. He can pop. He has home run speed to go with the guy who's can run it up the
4.39,
middle,
40.
has power. He's got it all from that perspective, and I actually think it's scary to think that he could grow in terms of getting more usage and just more acclimated as he plays more games. So for me, at a guy at the top there, I will take him all day for that age and that profile that a running back I could have for a few years to come.
Yeah, I love Jonathan Taylor. I think he's terrific. He's 22, actually, not 23.
I was reading
are you
I have
looking
ages
age
down
next
for what
year?
he is next year. So
Yeah.
like, that's cool.
Yeah.
When I'm doing my rankings, I'm kind of projecting forward. So yes, he turns 23 for next season. So he's only 22 right now. So
Yeah,
he's
so even
crazy
better.
young.
The years are terrific. Let's move on to our running backs 2 and 3 in consensus, and this is where we have some deviation. So in our consensus rankings, we have running back 2, DeAndre Swift, running back 3, Naji Harris, which is actually exactly how Jay had them ranked. Andrew, you also had DeAndre Swift at number 2, though Naji Harris fell to 4 for you. But let's stick with DeAndre Swift for a minute. Why DeAndre Swift as your running back number 2 overall?
Yeah, I feel like to a lesser extent. Well, first of all, we've seen DeAndre Swift very involved in the pass game. So as opposed to Taylor, who we like sort of the amount he's been involved in that, Swift is someone who is more of that profiles as a natural pass catcher, great dynamic player. And he's kind of been just like that on a very poorly performing Detroit Lions team. Possibly the reason why he came out of the rookie draft in 2020, or came out of the draft and influenced in rookie drafts that people would possibly be taking CEH over him, was that landing spot of Detroit that just felt so abysmal. And I just kind of love to see a player as an intangible that on a bad team can still kind of produce in and out like that. Through good and bad, the team's going to be leaning on him. They're going to be behind, and he's not going to get game flowed out of it. Like, they're going to continue to rely on him. It seems like that offense operates through him, and he has the talent to back that up, the pedigree, and again, for the same age reasons and all of that right now, he sort of also profiles as a better, longer-term respective to running backs, long-term asset for Dynasty in general.
Yeah, I love DeAndre Swift. He was down actually running back 5 for me, but in my tier 1 of running backs. The only reason I drop him down is because of I don't know when this offense gets significantly better in terms of him. They obviously, like, the biggest question is quarterback for them, and obviously other skill positions aren't great as well. So there's a lot of flux there that I don't love, and he's terrific as a pass catcher. He's on pace for 100 receptions or so. He's got 47 already, I believe, which is crazy. And that gives him such a safe floor. I mean, that is Kamara-esque type floor, which is definitely a kind of a guy that you would compare him to value-wise in terms of his efficiency. But he's averaging 3.2 yards a carry in an offense, and that is an offensive line that's not terrible and should get better. You want to see a little more efficiency between the tackles with him for his ceiling really to be unlocked in that offense, and that doesn't necessarily, I'm not out on him by any means, but it's just like, it ticks it down a little bit for me in terms of DeAndre Swift's ultimate ceiling. I just want to see that offense get better and get a little more stability. If they hit on a quarterback in a draft coming up, or they're able to pull something, I'll be more interested in him. But right now, I'm a little hesitant on that team. Then moving to our number 3, Naji Harris, who I actually had at my number 2, which honestly, I'll talk a little bit about him. I was surprised that I had him when I went through it today. I was surprised I had Naji Harris up this far, but he is a top 5 back in points per game as a rookie. He's in an offense that has a terrible offensive line. Like, really, he has to make things happen, but he is such an efficient runner that even with the terrible blocking that he's getting, like he's still mostly getting positive yards. His usage is ridiculous, like over 20 carries each of the last 3 games. He obviously had like a 19 target game 1 week, but has had a really great target floor. Yeah, he's just been really, really good. And given his lack of, mileage right now in the NFL, he is 23, so he's a little bit older than Taylor. I just like that system, coaching stability with Tomlin. I expect that team to get better just because of the situation that he's in. Like, if I'm gonna bet on because him and Swift are the ones I went really back and forth on in terms of where to rank them. Pick the organization that you believe in: the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Detroit Lions. And DeAndre Swift is going to have a great career, I have no doubt. But in terms of like floor and institutional stability, I love the situation Naji Harris is in. And yes, there is uncertainty with quarterback going forward, with this likely being Ben's last year. Yes, that O-line is bad right now, but I trust that organization to improve that situation sooner than I trust the Detroit Lions to improve that situation. And so I just came down with Naji Harris as my number 2 back.
You don't trust Man Campbell and the...
to their credit, and this is a very serious note on Dan Campbell, who we've had a lot of fun with at his expenses. They have played friskier than I expected that roster to be, because that roster is not this week, but
they
that
laid
roster
down and died.
That roster is devoid of talent, though, on both sides of the ball. They have no secondary.
The receivers are...
Khalif Raymond, I think, is their number 1 receiver. And, like, everyone made a lot about...
He had a 0 this weekend.
He had a 0 this weekend. And Amon-Ra Brown, like, he was fine in our tape evaluation. He was a 4th-round pick. I don't know what we were expecting out of that much. Amon-Ra Brown's not going to be the next coming of Antonio Brown.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, Antonio Amon-Ra St. Brown. And like TJ Hawkinson, I think, is a good talent, but like, is he really the elite tight end that we think he's going to be? Is he going to change things? He's been hit or miss. I like him enough, but it's not going to change an offense. But that's ultimately where I came down on him. But we should move on to our next. Actually, I want to bring up this question. It's not on running backs, but it's a trade question from Nick Cal. Is 2022 and 2023 first an overpay for Deebo Samuel and PPR Superflex? So 2 first-round picks for Deebo Samuel.
Nothing is an overpay for Deebo. Love Deebo.
I love
cannot
Deebo.
Overpay for.
Well, yes, you can overpay, but 2 first-round picks for Deebo Samuel, who I had as my number 10 Dynasty wide receiver. He's been
now
terrific.
my number 2 wide receiver. I was too low last week.
He's your number 2.
Your number 2.
Either way, I think we all agree that he is, in terms of value that he gives you, is a wide receiver 1, right?
Yeah.
Right now, yeah, because on the year he's just crazy good this year. He's like top 5. So.
And I like that offense overall, yeah.
I have no problem paying for that, especially if you're trying to win a championship this year. If you need him on your team, I don't mind paying that, particularly if those are a little further back. If you think you're a contender and you think they're like back end first round picks, that's a bit much. I wouldn't pay more than that, but
I would say this feels like a contender type trade, and if that's the case,
I have no problem.
Back end firsts for a wide receiver 1, and that's one of those almost like nitpicking. Like maybe you can grab a little bit that, like if you want to be like drive a hard bargain, you'll give those, but maybe you can get like a consolation pick back, like. Yeah,
listen,
you conserve a little value, but whatever.
Yeah, if you can throw in like if
the
you
price
can get
of winning
a second
now
back,
is expensive.
Well, yeah, exactly. You got to spend money to make money. That's what I say, and that's an offer that should get it done for Deebo Samuel. I think if you're a contender, that's a piece that gets it done for you. This isn't not like a tinkering around the edges. This is a top 5 wide receiver so far this year and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon with Deebo Samuel. And I think that's worthwhile. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't mind that at all. If you can,
if you can like Jamar Chase, Deebo Samuel has 5 less points and had a bye week. So.
Boom. And how much would you pay for Jamar Chase right now?
I mean, you can't even pay like that. Like you could pay 5
he's
for
Jamar
not Chase,
viable.
I think.
No, you can't do anything. But let's circle back.
Possible.
That was a good question because I actually think that is a strong example of what it. I mean, it doesn't feel good to give up 2 first-round picks, but like I think for a guy like Deebo Samuel, I think he's a difference maker.
Yeah, if you have him, you probably shouldn't trade him for less too. That's the other on the other.
Yeah,
side.
That's always
value your players because like you can hold him. Like there's no reason to pay him, to trade him. He's still young, so why am I giving him to you for like a single first? You should have to give up something. I gave up a first and Elijah Moore for him in the league earlier, a couple weeks ago. So.
Which is essentially 2 firsts for him, depending on the format that you're in. But like it's of that value. Let's move back to our next tier of consensus running backs here, and then we get into the aforementioned Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, and Alvin Kamara. I'm actually going to lump the next. You know what? I'm going to lump the next 4 in here because I think it's like the old guard versus the new guard that we ended up. So Derrick Henry, Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, Christian McCaffrey is our 4 through 7 consensus ranks in Dynasty. And I think you could consider a tier break in there, but I think these are all guys that are interesting to consider together. And Jay, I'm going to throw it back to you, specifically with this tier that I believe was the 1, 2, 3, 4 in some order, or possibly preseason. Why are we bringing the youth movement above the old guard here?
Old guard out, new in. Yeah, that's how it works in Dynasty. No, I mean for running back, you're balancing that always. It's the old guard that you've seen it from versus these newer running backs, and trying to balance the age. Can you get the production for numerous years, but still get the youth where maybe the production lasts longer? And you're trying to balance that against the unknown of how long the running back's going to last. We always talk about how old they get when they're 27, 28, but I mean, you can see them producing potentially to their 30. And then you're trying to envision your 22-year-old back like Swift or Taylor producing for 7, 8 years. So you're trying to balance that. So for me, the guys who have stood out and done it that are that young just get to be at the top. They're putting production that's close to these guys, maybe a little bit under Henry, who obviously got hurt, but he was far and away above everybody this year. But Taylor and Swift are really getting it done close to, and you probably think Henry's going to come down a little bit. I mean, the production he was putting up, albeit, he could still be good in the future. It's just hard to keep that crazy level of number 1 production up for a long time. So you're trying to get that balancing act where you get the guy who's right there, but you're going to get him for longer. And that's where I kind of stuck Kamara, McCaffrey, Henry were my next 3 under Taylor, Swift, Harris, because these are the guys that I have, I guess, the least question marks with out of some of the other ones. And Cook's close and Barkley's close. They're my next 2, but like this, for me, I have a little more questions with him. I ended up with Kamara at 4 because I feel like I have the least question marks for a guy that just gets, I mean, basically he's the highest target share of any running back in the league. And I just think that's projectable for a future for a guy who hasn't really gotten banged up. And we say that, and who knows what's in the future for any running back. I hope he stays
that about
healthy.
before.
Like Derrick Henry will never get hurt, and then 2 weeks later he's potentially out for the year. But I just think that I always kind of lean a little bit towards the pass catching running back because I just feel like that's something that can sustain. So for a guy that just gets it done with less touches on a system that I believe in, because he's still producing this year, and the quarterback situation completely changed. He's still getting so much percentage of target share there where he just puts up good games. He really hasn't had really a bad game really this year. Kamara's been really stable, and I see that continuing, so he gets the edge, and then the other guys kind of fall in place behind him in terms of guys where I think that production can last. They're just a little bit older, but...
Yeah, I like all of these guys for different reasons. I think the guy I struggle with the most is Christian McCaffrey because there is no if he's healthy, he is like the clear-cut number one option to start any single week. Like, that's the thing. It's like there's been no regression when he's healthy. He's played 5.5 games over the past year and a half. That's it. He's had a high ankle sprain. He had a shoulder injury, and he now has a hamstring injury. Don't know if he's going to play this week. Don't know if he's going to play the following week. And are we at the point with Christian McCaffrey where we have to consider him unreliable in terms of injury? Like, is this a case of, is this a systemic issue or is this a bad luck issue with Christian McCaffrey? And I'm not nearly like qualified enough to determine what that is in terms of like an injury expert. Like, it's like I would love to hear Stefania Bell's take on Christian McCaffrey in more depth, or other. I'm sure she's going to talk about it more, or other medical professionals who have a better understanding of how this sort of works. But like, we're a year and a half in on this, and it's 3 different injuries, and you just wonder, is like, do you have to bake in the potential and risk of him leaving for a considerable amount of time into your rankings of him going into next season in particular? I think you do at this point. This is a pretty good sample size, and until proven different, it's tough to consider CMC the 101 or a guy that you can trust going forward at that level. He's going to be a risk reward play.
Well, you almost start thinking, I mean, it's a complete position switch, but think of when Rob Gronkowski kind of got overtaken as like the tight end 1 and really became that guy who it was just baked in that like he's not going to make it through the season. And you can see that still happening with him, although we don't consider him in the esteem that we used to. But yeah, there was a point when other tight ends crept up on him. And I feel like it's kind of the same thing where it makes sense to pull McCaffrey, and he's still going to be in your RB1 area just because when he is on the field, he has that potential to be the best guy, like the best guy that week. That's just a reality. But you have to balance that with the fact that it could be half the season he's just not even on the field, and that's a tough thing to value. But you certainly got to put some of these other guys that you can rely on a bit more ahead of him. I'm with Jay. I'm with you, Josh, that I don't mind putting some of these younger guys up ahead of that because to further Jay's point, I think we don't even have to project for guys like Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift because they're young and we hope they keep doing it. It's like they're already out there doing it. So just that lack of questions, like I just don't know how you could take someone like McCaffrey over Jonathan Taylor, who's just knocking it out. I mean, I even go as far as to have someone like Dalvin Cook, even though he had his own sort of injury things, but it feels manageable now. I might even err towards him over CMC just because I feel like, what are you doing for me now? And if we look at the past 2 years, the most recent sample size, Dalvin Cook has been far more reliable.
Yeah, I kind of bake in some. He's a guy that I'm lower than you guys on because I always bake in that Dalvin's probably going to miss 3 or 4 games in a year. That's just like the reality. But like that's how you're draft. I think Gronk's a good example. You're like, I'm going to draft this guy. I know there's going to be some weeks that I'm not going to play him, but I'll take the 12, 13 because it's going to be elite. And maybe CMC can fall into that. I want to see. I'm reserving the right to kind of move him based on how they use him when he gets back. Because I think the fear that Andrew, you've brought this up before, is does his workload go down? Because that's half.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of his value is the fact that he's getting 20 to 30 touches a game and a lot of passing volume. Does it go down? So far, if their track record with at least the running backs that are filling in is that they're going with one guy. Chuba Hubbard is getting a ton of touches. He's like third in touches since week 4 on the year. He's had over 100 touches since he's filled in. Now, do they balance it with those two? Or are they just like, no, our backs are back and they're going to give it all to CMC? We'll see if he can handle the workload and not get hurt. Or does the workload come down to where it's good? Like I want to see it because maybe it gets to a manageable workload that's still good for fantasy. Or does it get into this split where it just gets dicey? I want to see that first before I'm like, all right, I got to really lower him. So I'm still keeping him in my top 5.
Yeah, I mean, CMC was seeing like LaDainian Tomlinson level usage rates where he's just getting like 30 to 40 touches a game between receptions and carries. It was just ridiculous. And that's a lot for anyone to handle. So that's ultimately the problem with CMC. And I mean, it just makes your roster construction strange because then you really have to worry about handcuffs. You really have to worry about contingencies for when CMC is not in the lineup. But let's move on to our next set of guys, and we have at the one at our number 8 running back Saquon Barkley. Number 9, we have Nick Chubb and Austin Eckler at number 10. And I want to start with Austin Eckler because I think he's an interesting case. He has been, when he's been pretty consistently for the past 2.5 years, when he's played, a top 5-ish back. But it feels right to have him separate and apart from the Cooks, the Henrys, the Kamaras, the McCaffreys, who are in a similar-ish production range as him, are at a similar-ish age range as him, but at the same time, I just trust them more than Austin Eckler long-term. And I'm not exactly sure why that is, and I'm wondering if either of you have any insight, because I think we're all around the same place with Austin Eckler. Jay, you have him at your 12. Andrew, you have him at your 10. And I have him at my 8.
It feels almost like he's the guy that you just want to keep pushing up your rankings. And I arguably feel like I could, as another player comparison thing, it almost feels like the working Cooper Kupp into your, that like the guy who's the number 1 receiver, like that we talked about last week. Austin Eckler, both in points per game and total points, is the number 2 running back in PPR right now. So he's doing it, and like when he's like on a per game basis, I feel like he's just knocking it out for the past few years now, and all the production is there. So it sort of feels like why aren't we higher on him? You know, maybe he's like slightly old. Let me pull his age. He's 26.
He's 26.
So not
he's the
too
same
old
as these other guys.
It's just it almost feels like he's a guy who there's no reason why you couldn't have him.
Is it just because he's a UDFA? Is that real? Is it just pedigree?
I don't know that that might be across the entire field of people ranking players, but I think it still comes back to the original point I've made on him, is that his value is completely buoyed, I think, by the fact that he catches so many passes. Like, that's sort of his one path to being elite, which that's a great path to have. But I still maybe have more of a bias towards players that are more, I mean, he's fairly efficient, but are just more upside efficient between the tackles and that are more perform as a traditional running back. I feel like he gets by in that form, but really his true bread and butter is those receptions. And even if he gets a ton of them, it's that same thing I made preseason, is that if he's going to be a top back, he's probably going to be getting like 90 receptions on the seat, which he might be on pace for. Like, he might be a little bit below. I think he's more on pace for like 75-ish, like or so, but that's still a ton. But again, I think that's where my ranking comes, is that he has to have that, or else he's not going to be the top player he is. So I guess I regress his value a little bit for that. Like, that's where I hold him back.
Yeah, his touchdown production's the thing that's jumped this year. 5 rushing touchdowns already, and then 3 from receiving perspective. So that was always my concern, was do they use him up close? Do they work in other backs and things like that? And this year they really haven't, for the most part. He's gotten kind of more of the workload overall, which is good. It's just he's one that it's tough to like project. How far can you project forward for him? Which maybe isn't fair. He's just a hard guy. I think the UDFA does play that pedigree and just his track record of always being
it's a little
up there, but not like, it's like, are you accepting of it? Maybe that's wrong. It's just this is probably the highest I've ever had him consistently in my dynasty. Eckler, obviously this year, but you're still like, you're trying to cross. Like, I have Saquon because you're still trying to project. Like, okay, I'm not drafting it for redraft. Eckler's the clear redraft guy. You're trying to, are there paths going to cross? where Saquon has this profile, and if he can just put together health for a couple years, guy's got all the skills from a receiving and a rushing perspective.
Well,
to do
yeah,
it
I mean,
all,
let's
you're
stick
hoping
with
it happens. Yeah.
Let's stick with Saquon for a little bit, Jay, because you were highest on him. You had him at number 7. You had him over Eckler. You had him over Dalvin Cook. You had him over Nick Chubb. Go down the list. Aaron Jones, Ezekiel Elliott. And you got into a little bit there, but is it really just the profile you're holding on to right now?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen it. It's not like we haven't seen it.
No,
it's been a little while now, but you're still holding out. I have enough leash left for the injuries, like to be like, okay, he can overcome them. They're a little bit separate injuries. It's not like it's the same knee. It's not like it's a chronic condition like a Todd Gurley, where it's like, yes, he has degenerative things in his knee. That's
until it is a chronic.
Well, you know,
no, I don't
want
to say that. Like, yeah.
So you're hoping that, yes, you saw Dalvin Cook, if we're fine ranking him, he had a couple years where he wasn't playing. And then he is now, okay, he's going to miss a couple games, but we're fine playing him 14 games out of the year and drafting him really high. For me, Saquon, I think, can fall right into that same thing. But there's plenty of question marks. You're just buying you're projecting the talent and hoping that the health comes together. Certainly that organization, it'd be nice if they, were a little bit more consistent too. You talked about organizational stability earlier. I don't know if I have that faith in the Giants, but so that's kind of a question mark for him as well. I wish that offense was a little better. Daniel Jones is up and down. He's looked good.
But at least they have. But at least their offensive coordinator is Jason Garrett.
Yeah, which is great. But
very creative play caller.
Super creative.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah,
Clapper.
But Saquon, that next year, it's where it's going to start to be like, yeah, you just got to drop him probably to the back of the, if it just doesn't come together.
Just drop him.
Point.
That's what I heard.
No, drop him to the end of your ones or the bottom of your, because you're just like, now he's getting older and it just hasn't clicked. And it's just like, I'm still buying just for that ceiling that I think is so high that, things changed and year to year. Last year, we weren't talking about Cooper Kupp in the light. We're talking about Deebo Samuel was hurt. Just things change year to year. So you can't play the dynasty game of just what have you done for me lately. You have to factor that in, but you also have to go, this guy, if things come together in these couple different ways, this guy could be number 1 in redraft next year. So that's a guy you might want on your team, and you have to try to rank them appropriately.
Yeah.
I'm still sort of wondering if, even when he showed his best, it's not like he had, a McCaffrey or what Derrick Henry was on pace to do.
Well, he was number 2 to McCaffrey. He was almost number 1. He was like a point behind McCaffrey
was
his
he?
rookie year. Yeah.
Maybe I'm just remembering this incorrectly.
He was RB2.
Also, that was, the first McCaffrey year. That wasn't... that was 2018.
Yeah, it wasn't the crazy McCaffrey year, but it was the year before where they were 1-2.
Yeah.
Honestly, and Saquon wasn't all, and he down the stretch the second year, he really crushed it. He had a bad beginning of the year that year, and then he really crushed it the last 4 or 5 games of the year that year. And then after that, it was just really injuries the last year and then this year. So it's been sort of 1.5 years where you've saw it. And then most of the rest of it was injury riddled.
But that's the year where it just feels tough because it's is it so different than what we do think an Alvin Kamara can do, or it's just, I guess that's my thought is it's I agree. There's always the projection that while we still sort of have that age window open for him, it's still always possible that he can return to form because the pedigree and talent is all there. It just gets harder with time to trust it. And I just feel like maybe I'm a little on the other end, more liberal with being able to pull him back a little bit more. And I could imagine that given the right situation might take someone like an Austin Eckler over him just because I want to go with what feels like the safer pick. But that still keeps Saquon in the RB1 conversation. And for someone who hasn't played much in the past year, again, I think that's still saying a lot for him.
Yeah, we never fault anybody for taking, because if you just don't want to play with injuries that have happened, then that's fine. It's like, yeah, I could completely see the safer play. He is a bit of a gamble, but I think it's like worth the reward you could get.
Yeah, I think the reward is certainly, like, the upside is certainly as high as anybody on here. Like, he could return to form. He averaged 24 points a game as a rookie when he was completely healthy. As you mentioned, Jay, he was basically tied with Christian McCaffrey for your RB1. Part of it's the injury, but honestly, I'm just more so concerned about that team overall. That offensive line's terrible. The quarterback situation is inconsistent at best. The offensive coordinator is awful, and this could all change, and hopefully it does. But I mean, there's just a lot of things that he has to win despite of, and if anyone can do it, it's Saquon. But it's a lot of stuff that makes me hedge a little bit with him, where I'd feel safer with an Austin Eckler over him right now. For now, that could certainly change, as you said. But let's get to our last two running backs in our top 12, and that is Javonte Williams at 11 and Aaron Jones at 12. So two very different guys in terms of, we're projecting for one, we're hanging on to performance for the other. But let's start with Javonte Williams, and Jay, I'll throw that to you as the resident Javonte Williams fan club president that we have here. I think we're all the same on Javonte Williams. I think we all had him in our top 12 or 13 at least. Andrew and I both had him at number 13. Jay, you had him at 10. So, like, what has Javonte Williams done to this point to make you buy in on him as a top 12 fantasy running back in Dynasty?
For me, it's two things. The age, obviously. He's 21. So that's great. What he's doing at the age that he's doing at, both in college and what he's done this year, is impressive. And he has done things this year. He is stuck in a 50-50 timeshare with Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon's still producing there. Vic Fangio is going to go with, he's not going to immediately give it to the rookie. This is probably not going to be his show unless Melvin Gordon gets hurt or next year. So, but in Dynasty, it doesn't matter. We're not playing for this year. But when I've seen him play this year, he's flashed everything that I've wanted to see. From the contact balance, broken tackles, burst, everything, pass catching. He's caught numerous passes involved there. He had 6 catches 2 weeks on that Thursday night game, had a receiving touchdown, so he can do it on all 3 downs. He checks all the boxes for a guy that can be a consistent top 12 running back year to year, because he can do it on all 3 downs. A guy that's not going to be easy to take down. He's going to get extra yardage. He should be used at the goal line as well. So it's just, once that timeshare is gone, the sky's the limit to me in terms of being a prolific RB1 for your team. So I'm ranking him as such, where I would take him that early in a redraft draft for Dynasty.
Yeah, I agree. I love Javonte Williams. Love the pedigree there. Just want to see him get the usage that I think he deserves. Let's move on quickly just to Aaron Jones. Andrew, you had him at number 12, a little higher than Jay, who I believe had him down at 14 or 15, rather. Why does Aaron Jones make it into your top 12?
I think he's also just proven to be that year in, year out, despite everything working against him, reliable back in Green Bay. I know there were some contract concerns that he's been like that. There's every reason not to go with it. Like, more recently was the contract concerns that got resolved. And we were afraid that Aaron Rodgers wouldn't be there. But he came back, and it just seems like everything's, despite all that, continued to come together for him, and he's definitely getting and making the most of his usage. We're kind of past that free Aaron Jones situation, and I think we already talked earlier this season that he's just a great contender by, I think, in my rankings, and I could have said this for Derrick Henry, who I have at number 3 despite the injury. Previous to the injury, I would have had him clear at number 1, but I think I'm still trying to bake into these rankings that we're talking about what you can do for me for the rest of the season. At the end of this season, when we're kind of putting another year on and moving to next year, I think I could argue for a lot of the younger guys to kind of shift up But right now, I think Aaron Jones, I shifted to him over Javonte, even though they're in the same tier, like that tier that I've got of them. I'm still going to err towards Aaron Jones for now because I think that for the rest of the season, he's the guy I'd rather have. But moving forward, that will change because that's more where some of the projection with Javonte, I think, becomes a little more useful to me because I think we all loved him. We love his tape. Despite only being 50-50, I think that's pretty good and maybe more of a conservative system that they're still going to the rookie 50% of the time. Whereas speaking of Derrick Henry, again, was someone who sat behind completely the types of DeMarco Murray and stuff like when he came in. So like, you've seen guys who turned out to be really talented getting way less usage early on. So I think I'm almost thankful for the amount of usage that Javonte's gotten at this point, and we know that he's going to get more later. Yeah. But yeah, who am I choosing down the stretch right now? It's Aaron Jones. So that's why I'm airing one spot higher on him right now.
Yeah, I feel the same way about him as I do about a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, that like what they can do down the stretch for you this year.
Oh, I also have Zeke for the same reason.
Yeah, I have the same thing. I have the same thing along with Nick Chubb, or I think they can be they're much more value for you for the rest of the year, and I think that gets some weight for me. But I think that's a good place to end it. That's our top 12. Again, our consensus goes Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Naji Harris, Derrick Henry at 4, Dalvin Cook, Kamara, CMC, Saquon at 8, Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Javonte Williams, and rounding out our consensus top 12 is Aaron Jones. That is, we've done our top 12 wide receivers. We've done our top 12 running backs. Next week, we'll do our top 3 tight ends because there's very little beyond that.
Just kidding. We're doing all top 12, right?
I don't think so. But thank you, as always, to both my brothers, Jay and Andrew. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Josh. And you can find me on Twitter at JC_DFF, writing at goingfor2.com, and doing the Fantasy Cheat Sheet podcast on Friday nights at 8:30 p.m. every Friday night, where we talk about 10 things you need to know for the Sunday's game. So check me out there.
Check out all of that. And thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Josh. And you can find me at Drew_music. That's on Instagram, Twitter. And also, if you want to find music, like the song that we use, Hired Guns for the theme music, that's from my band Ghost in the Snow. Find that at Ghost in the Snow Band, or just ghostinthesnow.com. I've got a couple different URLs. You can go to drewcmusic.com. It'll all bring you to the same place. That'll link you to all the socials and Spotify, Bandcamp. I'm done talking.
And you can find me at DFFJChris on Twitter. Remember to follow our Twitter, our Bros of Dynasty Twitter page, Twitter handle, whatever you call those things, at Bros of Dynasty. Subscribe to our Facebook page at Bros of Dynasty, and make sure you subscribe to our YouTube page right here so you don't miss our show every Tuesday at 8:30. And next week we'll of course be covering week 9 in the NFL. Remember to set your lineups and have a good night. Thanks so much. Bye.